Hi, I'm Oakley. I came home one night, early, unexpected, and found my parents sitting on the back steps of my house, shivering, lips blue, barely able to speak. They'd been locked outside by my husband's family. No one called me. No one let them in. They just left them there. And when I looked through the window, I saw someone laugh, then pull the curtain shut. What kind of family does that? What kind of husband? And how long had they been trying to erase me too? Without ever saying a word. The wind cut sharper than I remembered. I'd stepped out of the hospital an hour earlier than expected, the snow crunching under my worn sneakers. It was close to 11 at night. Grand Rapids had dipped below 15 degrees, and I'd left the parking lot still in my scrubs, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and coffee. I was supposed to crash in the nurse's break room, like every other double shift, but something told me to go home. Maybe it was the picture Alara had drawn that morning, our little stick figure family with big smiles and a dog we didn't even own yet. She'd tucked it into my work bag, like it was a secret. Maybe it was the gnawing ache in my chest from a week of missed dinners, missed bedtime stories, missed everything. Either way, I found myself driving through the slick streets of our neighborhood, thinking how surprised they'd be to see me walk in. But when I turned onto our block, the first thing I noticed wasn't the porch light. It was my parents' old Honda Civic parked at the curb. That was strange. They weren't supposed to be in town, at least not tonight. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield, no lights on inside the house. The driveway was clear, untouched by any recent footprints. And yet, my parents' car sat there quietly, dusted with a thin layer of snow. I pulled into the driveway, headlights cutting across the brick facade of our home. My keychain jingled as I got out, one of those reflexive sounds that meant safety, routine. I climbed the steps and reached for the front door. The key didn't turn. At first, I thought maybe the cold had jammed it. Happens in Michigan. But the second attempt didn't budge either. My hand trembled, whether from the temperature or something else. I pressed my ear to the door. No movement. No voices. I knocked. Soft at first, then harder, and again. Still nothing. I turned around and looked at the car again. My parents wouldn't just sit there for no reason. I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom, all around dinner time. I hadn't checked them during the shift. My hands were already stiff from the cold as I stepped off the porch, making my way toward the side yard, the snow soaking through the soles of my shoes. That's when I saw them. Curled up on the concrete back steps, my mother wrapped around my father like they were trying to preserve warmth between their bodies. Her coat hung loosely over her shoulders, not zipped. His gloves were missing. Their faces were pale, lips tinged with blue. My mother's glasses were fogged from her breath. My father, tough old Russell, was shaking. I dropped to my knees so hard it hurt. Mom? Dad? Their eyes opened slowly. Mom tried to smile, but her lips cracked. You came home, she whispered. I tried to help them stand, but their limbs barely responded. My phone slipped from my pocket as I pulled Mom up, half dragging, half lifting her by instinct more than strength. Dad groaned as he leaned on me, and I could feel his knees buckling. Who locked the door? I managed to ask. They told us to wait, Mom said, her voice barely a breath. Said, not our house. My heart pounded in my ears. I helped them both toward the front, but they couldn't make it far. The steps were too icy. My parents, my blood, had been left outside like unwanted mail. I tried the back door again, now frantic, pounding until my fists hurt. No one opened. I rushed around to the front, thinking maybe I could get in through the living room window if nothing else. That's when I saw them, inside. My sister-in-law, Destiny, her boyfriend, Calvin's youngest brother, sipping wine, watching a movie, laughing. Destiny turned toward the window, locked eyes with me. I didn't imagine it. She saw me. Then she reached over and pulled the curtain shut. And that's when something inside me broke. I ran across the lawn to our neighbor's house, Mrs. Cargill. She'd lived there since I was a kid. Knocked so hard I thought I'd break her screen door. When she opened, I didn't need to explain. She saw my parents, slumped over, barely holding on. She didn't ask questions, just helped me get them inside. into the warmth. While she brought blankets and hot tea, I wrapped my mother's feet in a towel and texted 911. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from cold anymore, but fury. Blinding, shaking, white-hot rage. I called Calvin's phone, straight to voicemail. Again. Nothing. I looked down at my parents, now bundled on Mrs. Cargill's couch, and couldn't stop the flood of guilt that washed over me. They had driven here, in this weather, just to drop off something, maybe to surprise me, and they were told to wait outside for hours, like stray dogs. My mother whispered something again. I leaned in. We knocked, but they wouldn't open, she said. Destiny said, not our house. The words lodged in my throat like glass. Not our house? I had scrubbed floors, paid bills, raised a daughter inside those walls. I'd handed over every spare dollar to cover Christmas presents for that same family. And tonight, they turned away the people who raised me, the woman who birthed me, the man who taught me how to ride a bike. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I stood on Mrs. Cargill's porch as the paramedics arrived, sirens flashing red and white across the snow, and watched my home from a distance, not with longing, not with sadness, but with something colder than the night air. Resolve. I returned to the house the next morning, not to make peace, but to see the truth. Mrs. Cargill had insisted I stay the night in her spare room. After the paramedics left and my parents were tucked safely under blankets with warm soup in their hands, she made me a cot near her bay window. And I couldn't sleep. I sat upright, wrapped in a second-hand quilt, staring out at the home I thought I understood. It looked peaceful from this angle, still, like nothing had happened, like it hadn't just witnessed something vile. When the sun finally rose, I made coffee for my parents and slipped my boots back on. The air was sharper than last night, but not as cruel. It didn't matter. The cold I carried now was internal. As I walked back across the yard, the snow crunched louder beneath my feet, like it wanted to say something. I stopped at the steps where I had found my parents hours earlier. That's when I saw it, a shattered porcelain teacup, half embedded in the frost. The pieces were scattered like confetti across the concrete, each shard glazed over in a film of ice. I bent down, picking up one piece gently with the edge of my glove. It still smelled faintly of peppermint. My mother had brought me tea. She came to bring her daughter warmth. And they, my so-called family, let her shiver until her joints locked up. I stepped inside my house, which was too quiet now, the kind of silence that isn't peace but tension, the kind you feel in courtrooms and hospital waiting rooms. I walked slowly, taking in every inch of the living room. The wine glasses on the coffee table were empty, but the smell of last night's laughter still lingered in the air, the kind of laughter that closes doors on good people. I poured the remaining tea into the sink and set the broken cup on the counter. I wasn't going to clean it. Let someone else deal with what they shattered. Then I made my way to the guest room, where Alara was still sleeping. Her cheeks were pink from the heat in the room, her hand wrapped around her stuffed elephant. I brushed her hair back and kissed her forehead, whispering, "Mommy's here." She stirred, but didn't wake. I was glad. I didn't want her to see me like this, tired in a way that wasn't physical. That teacup had cracked something open in me. I went back to the kitchen and called Calvin. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. The third time, he picked up. "What?" he said, groggy. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice flat. "Still at Destiny's," he replied. "Didn't think you'd want to deal with more drama after last night." More drama. "Did you know my parents were coming?" He sighed, long and loud, like I had just asked him to solve world hunger. "They should have called first." "So you did know?" "I saw the car, yeah. But it's not my job to babysit your family, Oakley. They didn't announce themselves, and they don't live here." There it was. No shame. No concern. Just a man inconvenienced by the presence of my blood. I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch until he started fidgeting on the other end. "Look," he said, "this house is already tense with my mom here for the holidays. Your folks showing up uninvited just made things worse." "Worse for who?" I asked. For your sister, who had to close the curtain so she wouldn't have to make eye contact with a freezing elderly couple? He went quiet. That's what I thought. I hung up. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. Instead, I stood in the center of our kitchen, staring at a photograph pinned to the fridge. It was from last summer, Alara's birthday. My mom had baked cupcakes, my dad had grilled hot dogs. Calvin's family didn't show up until dessert, and now, my parents weren't even allowed inside. I spent the next hour going through my messages, trying to piece together the timeline. Mom had texted me 3 times that day. I'd missed every single one. Work had been relentless, but that didn't make the guilt any lighter. I should have known something was wrong. I opened the family group chat. Me, Calvin, Destiny, his parents. The last message was from Destiny. I'll take care of it. She's too emotional right now anyway. Take care of what? I had never felt so surrounded, yet so alone. By noon, Calvin was back at the house. He walked in like nothing happened, tossed his jacket over the chair, poured himself orange juice, and started scrolling his phone. I didn't say anything at first. Then I walked over and turned his phone screen toward me. Let's talk about last night. He glanced up, but didn't put the phone down. We've been through this. No, I said. You avoided it. There's a difference. He exhaled, annoyed. Fine. What do you want me to say? That you knew, that you saw them, that you let them sit out there. He shrugged. I didn't lock the door. But you didn't open it either. He stood then, like the conversation had turned into an interrogation. Why are you always looking for a villain? Maybe if your mom didn't act like she runs this house, things wouldn't get so tense. I stared at him for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because I finally saw him clearly. You know what scares me most? I asked. Not that you didn't stand up for them, that I ever thought you would. He didn't respond, just looked away. I nodded slowly. You didn't say anything. Not last night, not today, not ever. And now I realize, you never will. That was the moment I stopped asking for his side. I didn't need it anymore. I walked upstairs, grabbed a bag from the closet, and packed a few essentials for Alara and me. I wasn't leaving permanently, not yet, but I needed space. I needed to think without being gaslit into silence. Before I left, I passed by the kitchen one more time. Calvin was still at the table, pretending to be on his phone. I looked at him and said, Silence isn't neutral, Calvin. It's a choice, and you've made yours. Then I walked out the door. That night, I called my sister, Denise. We hadn't talked in months. No fight, just distance. She picked up on the second ring. You okay? She asked immediately. No, I said, but I'm finally paying attention. There was a pause. And then, in a voice softer than I expected, she said, I don't think this was the first time they tried to freeze you out. And in the silence that followed, something inside me settled. Not peace, not yet, but something closer to power. I let myself into the house late the next morning. Calvin was already gone for work. The driveway was empty, and the silence inside stretched thin and strange, like the kind you get walking into a funeral parlor before the service begins. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't drop my purse on the counter or kick off my shoes like I normally would. Instead, I stood just inside the doorway, breathing in the sterile air, scanning the place I was supposed to call home. The warmth of Mrs. Cargill's living room still clung to me, but in here, it was different. Off. Too neat. Too quiet. Like someone had tidied up a version of my life that didn't include me anymore. I moved slowly through the living room. At first, I didn't notice it, probably because I didn't want to. But when my eyes landed on the mantel above the fireplace, my body stopped moving altogether. There used to be a photo there. A large black and white print from our wedding day. Calvin in a dark navy suit, me in my mother's lace veil. We were standing outside the church, Alara holding my bouquet like it was a prize she'd won. We looked happy, real. Now, in its place, hung a canvas print of Calvin's family on vacation in Arizona. Matching outfits, all desert tones and fake smiles. Valora, front and center. I wasn't in the picture. Neither was Alara. I stepped closer. Gone, too, were the frames that used to sit on the side table. Alara's baby photos, my dad pushing her in a swing, my mom braiding my hair in the kitchen. All gone. Instead, a porcelain figurine of Valora holding a Bible now took center stage. There was even a framed quote that read, "Family is who shows up." That one made me laugh out loud. I opened the cabinet underneath, hoping maybe someone had just moved our pictures for the holidays. But no, they'd been jammed into a lower shelf, tucked behind a stack of old mail and unused party decorations. Dust clung to the glass like it had been there a while. This wasn't redecorating, it was erasure. And I was the one being erased. I stood there for a moment, breathing through my teeth, trying to piece together how many small edits had been made without me noticing. Like a book being rewritten, one paragraph at a time, until the original story was gone. That's when the memory came flooding in. Last week, Alara's birthday. We'd decided on a small party, just family. I had assumed Calvin would handle the invites to his side, and I'd told Mom and Dad to stop by around 5, but they never came. When I called my mother later that night, she apologized, said she hadn't received a time, thought maybe the plan had changed. Calvin had brushed it off. "It was a simple miscommunication," he'd said. "Don't make it a thing." At the time, I let it go. But now I remembered Alara standing at the end of the night, staring at the leftover cake with that look only kids have when they're trying to make sense of disappointment. She had asked, "Did Grandma forget my birthday?" And I, like a fool, had said, "Of course not, baby. She probably just got busy." I felt sick. I went to Alara's room and found her dollhouse still covered in glitter from the party. She'd been so excited, so sure everyone she loved would be there. But she'd waited all evening for my parents, glancing at the door every time someone laughed too loud or the wind knocked a branch against the window. I sat on her bed, picked up one of the dolls, and stared at it. This family had decided who belonged, and my daughter was already learning what it felt like to be second in her own story. I couldn't let it happen again. I went to the office, opened the filing cabinet Calvin never touched, and pulled out the documents, mortgage statements with my name on them, utility bills, daycare invoices, my direct deposits. It hit me like a cold splash to the face. I had funded this home, kept it afloat, made the late-night grocery runs and the early morning lunches, paid the internet, covered the hospital bills when Calvin's brother had a sports injury and Valora forgot her purse. And yet, I had no voice here. I opened my laptop, clicking into the group chat between Calvin and his siblings. I'd only discovered it once when I used his phone to order food. The chat's name? The Real Whitlocks. I wasn't in it. I scrolled through messages, screenshots of my texts to Calvin about Alara's birthday, jokes about Oakley's drama, a meme about overreacting wives. One message stopped me cold. Destiny had written, "She thinks she's part of this family because she signed some papers." They'd been erasing me in private long before they started doing it out loud. I sat there a while, letting the anger settle. Not boiling, not frantic, cold. I printed out every statement with my name on it, stapled them, filed them in a folder, labeled it Household Contributions, Oakley. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I needed it. I needed proof of something, anything, that I wasn't just making it up in my head. The sun had dipped below the windowsill by the time I stood up again. I passed by the fireplace once more, looking at that Arizona canvas, and I didn't feel hurt anymore. I felt done. I walked to the hallway mirror, the one I used to check my hair before work, the one Alara used to draw smiley faces on with her fingers after a shower. I looked at myself, really looked, and whispered, "You've been disappearing for years, not anymore." The moment I stepped into that hospital room, everything narrowed. The lighting was soft, too warm for what we were walking into, and yet it still felt sterile. My mother lay tucked beneath a blanket far too thin for someone who had nearly frozen to death. Her cheeks were pale, her lips dry and cracked, and her eyes fluttered open slowly, as if waking required permission. The doctor stood beside her chart, his expression calm in that practiced way people in white coats learn over years of telling families bad news. He didn't sugarcoat it. "If she'd been outside another 30 minutes," he said, "we might not be having this conversation." That sentence landed like ice water down my back. My father sat quietly in the corner, clutching one of those flimsy styrofoam cups the hospital always gives out. The coffee inside had gone cold. He hadn't touched it. His gaze didn't lift when I entered. It was fixed on the floor, like he was counting the tiles or staring through them. Maybe both. I approached the bed, touching my mother's hand gently. It was warmer than last night, but not by much. "Mom," I whispered. She looked at me and managed a faint smile. "We didn't want to bother you," she said. "They made it clear we weren't welcome." I closed my eyes, let her words sit for a second. My breath caught in my chest. I had expected exhaustion, anger, even silence, but not that. Not the quiet acceptance that she had internalized exile like it was a courtesy. She didn't want to bother me. I stepped back, trying to keep my composure. I excused myself from the room, found the hallway, and pulled out my phone. Calvin answered on the second ring. "She's stable," I said. But the doctor said 30 more minutes and she wouldn't be. There was a pause, just long enough to register as disinterest. "That's unfortunate," he said finally. "Hope she gets better." I stared at the wall across from me, pale beige, scratched. The kind of wall you only ever see in hospitals and schools with tight budgets. "That's all you have to say?" I asked. "What else do you want, Oakley? I didn't tell them to come unannounced. This isn't all on me." The way he said it, like we were splitting a dinner check instead of responsibility for a human being, broke something in me. "You know," I said, "there was a time when I would have made excuses for you. I used to believe you just didn't know better. Now, I think you were raised to look down on people like my parents, and you never questioned it." He didn't respond. I didn't wait for him to. The next few days passed in a fog of IV drips and hospital meals. Alara stayed with Denise, who drove in the night I called her. Mom was discharged on Saturday morning, still weak but lucid. I helped her into the passenger seat, wrapped a scarf around her neck even though the sun had come out and temperatures had climbed above freezing. I didn't care. I couldn't unsee her huddled on those steps, barely clinging to consciousness. Sunday came, and with it, the service at First Grace Baptist, the church Calvin's family had attended for decades. Mom and Dad didn't want to go, said they felt awkward, said they didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable, but I insisted. "You didn't do anything wrong," I reminded them. "You deserve to be seen." We arrived early. The sanctuary was already buzzing with choir members warming up and ushers handing out programs. I walked in with my parents behind me, trying to ignore the stares, the polite but distant smiles. Valora stood near the altar, arranging flowers. When she saw us, her face froze. Then she quickly turned away. I approached the usher. "We're on the Whitlock list," I said. "Reserved seats." He flipped through a clipboard, confused. "I only see 6 names, and you 3 aren't on here." "Excuse me?" I asked. He gestured helplessly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Maybe it was a mistake." "No, it wasn't." I turned around. The front row was full, Calvin, Destiny, Valora, and a few others. No empty seats. I scanned the aisle, found 3 open spots in the back row. We sat in silence. Midway through the sermon, I glanced at my mother. She was trying not to look at the altar. Dad sat with his jaw clenched, hands folded so tightly the knuckles had gone white. I wanted to scream, wanted to stand up and shout, "They tried to freeze these people, and now you're letting them disappear again." But I didn't. Instead, I memorized every face that turned toward us with feigned sympathy and unspoken judgment. I watched Valora nod along to the preacher's words about compassion and community, like she wasn't the one who had closed the door on both. Back at home that afternoon, I pored over everything: photos, emails, texts, calendar entries. I started a document titled Patterns. It wasn't about revenge. It was about preservation. Because if I didn't write it all down, who would believe me later? This wasn't just a moment. It was a history of erasure, orchestrated in plain sight. I listed every birthday my family had been excluded from, every holiday accidentally planned on weekends we couldn't attend, every time Calvin forgot to tell me about a gathering and then made me feel dramatic when I found out too late. I saw the shape of it now, the quiet restructuring of a life to make me smaller, less visible, easier to dismiss. That night, while Ilara did her homework and Mom napped on the couch, I typed a note on my phone. Silence doesn't mean peace, it often means permission. Then I pressed save. They thought I'd go quiet again. They were wrong. After Mom's hospital release, things in the house moved in that slow, foggy way they always do after a crisis. People make too much tea, fold laundry they've already folded, check doors twice, speak softer than usual, like the weight of what could have happened makes everything around them more fragile. I leaned into it for a few days, half because I needed to, half because it gave me time to think. And thinking is dangerous when you finally stop trying to excuse the inexcusable. On Tuesday morning, while my mom and Ilara were at the park with Denise, I stayed back to clean. That was the excuse I gave anyway. The truth, I needed answers. I needed to confirm what I already suspected in my bones. I went into my mom's purse, not proud of it. Didn't feel good doing it, but guilt didn't outweigh the urgency. I opened her phone, opened her call history. I should have been prepared. My number was blocked, not grayed out, not set to do not disturb, blocked. My father's phone showed the same. There was no way in hell either of them had done that themselves. My hands didn't shake. Not this time. Instead, something settled in me. A steadying. I'd felt it once before, when I was 24 and stood up to my former boss for firing the only black nurse on our floor without cause. I hadn't been loud. I'd been exact, precise, effective. That version of me was back now. I started looking deeper. I scrolled through texts from the past 2 weeks. Nothing from me, nothing from Ilara, nothing from my sister. All wiped clean. I knew who had done it. The same person who smiled at church potlucks while pulling strings like a puppet master in the background. The same woman who once told me, family harmony depends on a little healthy distance. What she meant was, stay in your lane, don't ask questions, don't get too comfortable. I closed the phones, put them back exactly where I found them, and moved next to Ilara's backpack. Pulled out her tablet. It took less than 5 minutes to find the filters. Messages from Grandma Varnell were redirected to a junk folder. Notifications from Denise were silenced. Even photos I'd sent of Ilara's school projects were missing. Systematic. Intentional. I wasn't just being pushed out, I was being erased. That afternoon, after Ilara had gone down for a nap, I walked into the living room where Calvin was lounging with his laptop, scrolling through sports news like the world wasn't tilting off its axis. He didn't look up. "Hey," I said, calm, steady. "Hey," he mumbled, distracted. "Can I borrow your laptop?" He shrugged. "Sure, just don't close my tabs." I took it to the dining table, opened a new window, and typed slowly, pausing between each letter of the search term, Whitlock's only. It wasn't a guess. It was something I'd seen over his shoulder once, when I passed him a bowl of mashed potatoes during Thanksgiving. It was there. A private chat thread. I clicked it open. 15 messages in the last 48 hours, most of them from Destiny, of course. Her tone was always bubbly, like sugar dipped in vinegar. One thread stood out. Destiny. "Next time they want to show up uninvited, we should just leave a sign on the door. Not welcome." Kendall, Calvin's younger brother. "Bet she'll finally get the message." Valora. "Maybe now she'll learn not to treat us like second place." My name wasn't used, not once, but every sentence screamed me. I stared at the screen, reading each line over and over, letting the syllables dig into me like nails. Not one of them had stepped up. Not one had said, "That went too far." Not even Calvin. He'd been in the group chat the whole time. His little reactions to their comments showed up right there in blue. I closed the laptop and returned it to the couch. He didn't notice. That night, after dinner, I didn't announce my decision. I didn't cry, didn't raise my voice. That's what they'd expect. Tears, hysteria, dramatics. The playbook they like to accuse me of reading from. Instead, I reset every password tied to my name. Bank accounts, email, shared streaming platforms, utilities, credit cards. The only thing I didn't touch was Alara's school account. I needed that one clean for what I was about to do. Calvin was in the bedroom when I walked in, still scrolling, always scrolling. I changed the passwords, I said plainly. He didn't look up. To what? To everything. My name's on all of it. Now he looked. Are you serious? I nodded. Dead serious. Is this some kind of punishment because I didn't jump to defend your mom? No, I said. It's because you stood back while people erased my family from our daughter's life. And then you helped them. Oh, come on. I'm not playing tennis with your defensiveness anymore, I interrupted. You can't keep hitting the ball back with spin and expect me to run after it. He stared at me like I'd grown another head. You're being ridiculous. I tilted my head. Maybe, but I'd rather be ridiculous than invisible. He scoffed, rolled his eyes. You love being the victim. That made me smile. It was small, hollow, but it was mine. If you're this comfortable letting people erase me, I said, then I'll take responsibility for making myself unforgettable. I left the room, went downstairs, opened the drawer in the side table where I'd been storing documents for months, things I used to call just-in-case papers. I slid a flash drive into my laptop, copied every financial file, every receipt, every birthday invitation they'd failed to forward to my family, every silent offense I could find. Then I grabbed a yellow legal pad and wrote one line at the top. Pattern of exclusion, Oakley, Varnell, Lionel. Underneath, I began bulleting everything, every moment, every omission, every act of subtle cruelty disguised as tradition. An hour passed, maybe two. The house was quiet. When I finally stood, I felt taller, not because I had won anything, but because I had stopped shrinking. I walked into the den where Calvin was now watching a documentary, pretending nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway, holding the flash drive in one hand and the pad in the other. He glanced at me. I didn't wait for an invitation. It's time to stop asking for permission to exist. The games didn't stop. They just turned crueler. The morning after that dinner, I found a bill stuffed halfway under the front door. Not a typical mail delivery, no envelope, no stamp, just a folded piece of paper with my name on it and a neon pink sticky note that read, "Thanks again." It was a copy of a hospital bill. Emergency room, $2,300. Not my name on the patient line, not Alara's. It was Kendall, Calvin's younger brother. The date? 2 weeks ago. I stood there, still in my pajamas, holding that invoice with both hands as if it might dissolve if I stared hard enough. It didn't. I didn't remember authorizing that charge. I didn't remember even hearing about Kendall going to the ER. But the last 4 digits of the account number matched my credit card. My card. I walked into the kitchen where Calvin and Valora were sipping tea, talking about cinnamon rolls like nothing in the world had gone wrong. The morning sun was slanting through the window, lighting up the edge of Valora's earrings. She always dressed up for her morning tea like she expected a camera crew to walk in. I didn't wait. I dropped the bill on the counter, hard. Calvin flinched. Valora barely blinked. "Did you use my card to pay Kendall's ER bill?" I asked. Calvin frowned. "What are you talking about?" I pointed. That's my card. I didn't approve it, and it's not a shared account. So who?" Before I could finish, Valora reached over and calmly peeled the sticky note off, folding it in half and tossing it in the trash. "Family helps family," she said smoothly, like she was quoting scripture. "Or are you just keeping score now?" I let the silence hang. "No," I said finally. "I'm done funding people who would let my mother freeze to death." Calvin opened his mouth, but Valora got there first. "Careful," she said. "Words like that can ruin a reputation." I stared at her. "No reputation is worth this much silence," She smiled, polite and cutting. You're making things unnecessarily difficult, Oakley. We're all trying to move forward. Forward from what? I asked. From pretending none of this happened? She blinked slowly, then turned her attention back to her tea. The conversation was over, as far as she was concerned. That evening, we had another family dinner, one of those forced, get-back-to-normal events Valora was so fond of. She made lasagna, Calvin opened a bottle of wine, and I brought Alara's favorite garlic bread, because I knew if I didn't, nobody else would think of her. My parents were invited this time, technically. They sat at the far end of the table. The conversation looped around them like they weren't there. I watched my mother sip water, eyes downcast. My father sat straighter than usual, as if trying to physically assert his presence. Midway through the meal, my father began to tell a story, one I hadn't heard in years. But he smiled slightly, looking at Alara. You know, he said, when your mom was about your age, she once built a kite out of paper and twigs. Wouldn't believe it flew, but it did. Caught the wind just right. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but before he could continue, Valora's youngest daughter, Lena, interrupted. That story doesn't really match the energy of our Italian-themed dinner, does it? Laughter erupted from the other side of the table, not polite chuckles, full-on laughter. My father stopped talking. The room quieted just enough to hear forks clinking. I turned my gaze to Calvin, who sat with his head down, cutting his food like none of this was happening. You wanted harmony? I said. Not loud, not angry, but pointed. This is the sound of erasure. Lena stopped laughing. Valora shot me a look. I didn't care. After dinner, while everyone pretended to clear the table, I announced, calmly, that I would be meeting with a lawyer the next morning to start separating our finances. Calvin finally looked at me. Wait, what? I've already set up a trust for my accounts. Anything under my name is no longer accessible to this household. Valora frowned. You're being petty. No, I said. I'm being clear. And Alara? Calvin asked. What, you're going to pull her out of her routine because of one bad week? One bad week? I echoed. I stared at him like I was seeing him for the first time, like I needed to study the face of someone who could say something like that and believe it. If you think letting people freeze is something my daughter should grow up accepting, I said slowly, you've misjudged me completely. Nobody said anything. Nobody apologized. Nobody admitted to using my card, or blocking my calls, or excluding my family from years of celebrations. They just looked at me like I was the problem for refusing to keep pretending. I stood, set my napkin down on my plate, and took a breath that felt like it had been waiting years to leave my chest. You've crossed my last boundary, I said. From here on, it's mine to defend. I didn't need fireworks. I needed facts, and I had them. The next morning, I pulled into Mrs. Cargill's driveway just as the frost was lifting off the rooftops. She was already up, of course. That woman never slept past 6. Her porch light was still on, and she opened the door before I had even knocked. I've got something for you, she said softly, like she was handing over a casserole instead of a loaded gun. She led me inside and pulled a tiny USB from the drawer near her phone. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from restraint. She said, I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't keep this to myself. It was a recording. I didn't ask how she got it. I didn't need to. She'd mentioned once that her kitchen security system sometimes picked up audio from the side yard, especially when the wind pushed sound against her walls. She never said more than that. I thanked her. I didn't promise what I'd do with it because I didn't know yet. I drove home in silence, parked in the driveway, and sat there for a long moment, gripping the USB like it had a heartbeat. Inside, I plugged it into my laptop, opened the file, and pressed play. The voices were clear, too clear. It was Valora and Destiny. Valora's voice was unmistakable, smooth, clipped, always just shy of sweet. Let them sit out there, she said. Let Oakley see what it feels like when we choose who belongs. Destiny laughed, light and mean. You really think she'll get the message this time? I don't care if she gets it, Valora replied. I care that we set the tone. I stopped the recording, then played it again, then one more time. Each time it got easier to breathe, because I wasn't crazy, I wasn't dramatic, I wasn't imagining things. This wasn't neglect, it was punishment, and now I had proof. By noon, I had an appointment booked with an attorney, not a divorce lawyer, yet, but someone who specialized in asset protection and documentation. I forwarded her everything: the audio, scans of the hospital bill, photos of my mother's cracked lips and frostbitten hands, screenshots from Calvin's group chat where I was the invisible elephant they all snickered around. I wasn't out for revenge, I was building an exit. On my terms. That afternoon, Valora showed up at my door. She didn't knock. She didn't even look around, just walked up like she owned the place, a store-bought pie in hand, her church lady smile pasted on like foundation. "Thought I'd stop by," she chirped when I opened the door. "Some of the neighbors were asking about Alara, wanted to know how your mama was holding up." I didn't invite her in, but she stepped through anyway, gliding past me like she was floating. "I brought Dutch apple," she said, placing the pie on the counter like it absolved her of everything. "You didn't have to do that," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Oh, honey, don't be like that." Her tone softened, but not genuinely. "I know things got tense, but let's not turn this into a vendetta. You're better than that." She moved in closer, dropped her voice. "Don't be that woman who brings the whole house down," she whispered. "You'll regret it." My spine didn't stiffen, I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned in slightly and said, "The house was already burning." "You just didn't notice the smoke." Valora blinked, just once, then smiled again, tighter this time, and backed away. "Well," she said, louder now, "I'll leave you to it. You let me know if you need anything." She left the pie. I threw it away. That night, after Alara was asleep, Calvin tried to smooth things over. He came into the kitchen while I was loading the dishwasher, leaned against the fridge like he was posing for a commercial. "We could put all this behind us, you know," he said. "Clean slate. Start over." I looked at him, really looked at him, like a woman does when she realizes the man she married no longer exists, if he ever did. "That's the difference between us," I said. "You stand behind things. I face them." He didn't understand what I meant. I didn't bother explaining. After he went to bed, I opened my laptop and pulled up my email. I typed out a short message, attached the audio file, added a few screenshots. Then I copied the email addresses of the church board members, the ones Valora had built her social clout around for years with prayer breakfasts and charity raffles. In the subject line, I wrote, "Regarding Mrs. Valora Whitlock." In the body, just one sentence. "This is the woman behind your bake sales and prayer groups." Then I hit send. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let my chest rise with a breath I hadn't fully taken in weeks. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt justified. 6 days later, the dining room was set like something out of a magazine spread. The table was laid out with polished silverware, bone-white china, and linen napkins folded with militant precision. Valora had arranged the place settings herself. She always did when she wanted to stage forgiveness like theater. A roast sat in the center of the table, surrounded by glazed carrots and rosemary potatoes, her way of saying, "Let's pretend nothing happened," but I hadn't come to play along. When she'd suggested clearing the air, I had only one condition: everyone brings something honest to the table. She thought I meant apologies or confessions. I meant proof. Calvin stood at the kitchen island, opening a second bottle of wine. Destiny and her husband arrived minutes before dinner, offering the usual air kisses and fake concern. "I hope your mom's feeling better," Destiny said, already halfway through pouring herself a drink. "She's recovering," I replied flatly. Alara sat quietly next to me, coloring while the adults mingled. Her presence was a reminder of who I was doing this for. At exactly 6:03, once everyone was seated, Valora stood at the head of the table and clinked her glass. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice sweet as syrup. "I think it's important we reset, move forward, and remind ourselves we're stronger together." She glanced at me like she expected a nod of agreement. I gave her none. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker. I set it gently in the center of the table, next to the butter dish. "What's that?" Calvin asked. "Something honest," I said. "Like I requested." I tapped play. Valora's voice poured into the room. Clear, measured, unmistakable. "Let them sit out there. Let Oakley see what it feels like when we decide who belongs." The room went silent. Destiny froze, her wineglass halfway to her lips. Calvin's face drained of color. Valora opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "No interruptions," I said. "Let the whole thing play." The recording ended 38 seconds later. No one moved. I let the silence stretch. Let it grow uncomfortable. Let it land. Then I pulled a manila folder from my bag and laid it flat on the table. I opened it slowly and began removing documents. The mortgage, my name, the electricity and water bills, my payments, the hospital discharge summary, my mother's name, date, diagnosis, doctor's signature, the emergency room bill that was charged to my card for Calvin's brother, the chat logs, the group thread labeled Whitlocks only, the line, "Maybe now she'll learn not to treat us like second place." I placed each page down one by one like a dealer in a card game, except the stakes were my dignity. "Let's talk about who's really kept this house running," I said. Valora's jaw tightened. Calvin blinked, opened his mouth, then closed it again. Destiny had the decency to look away. I turned to Alara, who was now looking up at me with wide eyes. I smiled softly and placed my hand over hers. "I was erased in silence," I said, turning back to the adults. "Tonight, I reclaim my name out loud." Calvin finally found words. "What do you want?" I didn't even hesitate. "Freedom," I said, "and for my daughter to never think this was love." The rest of the dinner was a blur. People pushed food around their plates. Valora tried to pivot to a story about a church fundraiser. No one laughed. No one picked up the thread. An hour later, I packed a suitcase upstairs. Just the essentials. Clothes for me and Alara, her schoolwork, her favorite books, the stuffed elephant she slept with. Calvin stood in the doorway, watching me. "You're really leaving?" "Yes." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." He swallowed hard. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm finally reacting." Downstairs, Valora waited by the front door. She didn't speak. She didn't apologize. She just stared like I was a crack in her perfect wall. As I opened the door, Alara tugged my sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, "are we coming back?" I kneeled down, zipped up her coat, and looked into her eyes. Only if they become the kind of people who'd never leave Grandma in the cold. We walked out into the crisp night air. I didn't look back. 6 weeks later, the air felt different. Not just because I was now waking up to sunlight through a soft Carolina curtain instead of icicles clinging to gutters, but because my chest didn't tighten before my feet touched the floor. Because the silence in our apartment wasn't laced with tension. It was just quiet, peaceful. Charlotte had been kind to us. The move wasn't dramatic. I didn't pack a moving truck in the middle of the night or announce my departure with some teary Facebook post. I booked a furnished apartment, arranged for Alara's school transfer, and bought new toothbrushes at Target the day we arrived. No headlines, just decisions, one after another. Forward. Our new place wasn't big. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. The carpet creaked and the windows needed replacing. But Alara decorated her room with paper butterflies and glow-in-the-dark stars, and every night she fell asleep under them, her breath steady, her body relaxed. That alone made the rent worth it. I'd taken a job at a pediatric clinic across town. Nothing fancy, not a title upgrade. But I walked in each day knowing I was there by choice, not because someone else needed me to prove my worth. Mom and Dad moved down a few weeks later. They're staying in a senior-friendly complex a mile from us, where they've already made friends with a retired couple from Georgia who host domino nights and swear by coconut oil for everything. There were hard days, of course. Nights when I'd hear a sound and instinctively brace for criticism. Or when Alara would say something simple like, "Is it okay if I call Grandma now?" And my stomach would knot before remembering. Yes. Here. It's okay. Sometimes I still expected the cold, but it doesn't come anymore, not from the weather or the people around me. One Thursday afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. The handwriting was careful, too perfect. I opened it, heart already knowing it was from Valora. Just one sentence inside. Can we talk? No apology, no acknowledgement, just a question dressed up like olive branches. I didn't rip it up, didn't burn it. I placed it in a drawer. I wasn't ready. I might never be. And that would have to be enough. For her, for me. Life didn't wait for me to decide. A few days later, Alara had a school performance. The theme was belonging. They wore paper wings and recited poems about family. I sat in the second row, clutching a folded program and a tissue just in case. Alara stood at center stage for her solo, her little hands gripping the mic stand. Home, she sang, is where hearts stay warm. That's when the tears came. Not loud, not messy, just soft and sudden, like my body finally believed we were safe. After the performance, her teacher came up to me, smiling. She's a natural leader, she said. Kind, brave, the kind of kid other kids want to follow. I nodded, speechless. Later that week, I found out Calvin was under investigation for financial misconduct. Apparently, his misuse of shared credit lines had triggered flags with one of our old banks. I wasn't surprised. I hadn't pressed charges, but apparently, truth has a way of surfacing without permission. Valora had stepped down from her church leadership roles. Personal reasons, she told the congregation. I didn't share the recordings. Didn't need to. The silence that followed her resignation said more than any email ever could. I didn't gloat. But I didn't forgive, either. Sometimes truth doesn't have to roar to be heard. It just needs to be whispered at the right time. One night, after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened the journal I'd been avoiding. The pages were mostly blank. I hadn't written much since we left, too busy trying to live instead of reflect. But tonight felt right. I picked up my pen. I used to think family was about keeping peace, I wrote. Now I know. It's about keeping each other warm. I stared at the words, read them back slowly, and felt something shift inside me. A soft exhale I didn't know I'd been holding. Just then, I felt a familiar weight crawl into my lap. Alara curled against me, her cheek resting on my shoulder. She looked up, sleepy-eyed, and whispered, "We're safe now, right, Mommy?" I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her close. "Yes, baby," I said. "We're safe." Sometimes the hardest part isn't walking away. It's realizing you were never truly welcome to begin with. This story isn't just about a door left locked. It's about boundaries, about reclaiming your voice in a family that's tried to silence you for years. It's about choosing peace over appearances, truth over tradition. Have you ever been treated like a guest in your own life? Share your story in the comments. We want to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more real, raw family stories that speak truth where silence once lived.